What's up, traders? Today I'm going to go over where shares come from and how they're divided up and traded. All right, traders, thanks for tuning in. This is actually going to be part one of a part two series. Part two will be on how the float of the stocks affect the price action within your trading, your intraday trading. But let's get started here with the actual shares of a stock. So how this works, it's actually pretty simple when you look at it via a chart. An IPO will be formed, which is an initial public offering, where shares will actually be authorized and issued. These shares refer to the largest number of shares that the company can issue. However, this doesn't mean that the company has to offer all those shares to the public. In most cases, companies will actually keep a portion of those shares in what they call a treasury. Now, this treasury, this is usually to maintain, if I could speak today, maintain a controlling interest within the treasury to avoid any possible takeover bids. However, within these extra shares of the treasury, they can also turn them into cash instead of taking out an additional loan, which then leads us to the outstanding shares. So basically, you'll have the amount they keep in their treasury from the shares that they were authorized to issue, which then circles back to how many shares are then left outstanding. So let's just show you what I mean. So say we'll call this stock XYZ. So if XYZ has 1,000 shares, and then they decide to keep, we'll say 550. That would leave us with 450 shares outstanding. Now, within these shares outstanding, they are what a company has actually issued and what can be bought and sold by the public, as well as the shares that are restricted that require special filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, or otherwise known as the SEC, before they can be transacted on the market. The restricted shares are usually given to insiders as a part of their salaries or as additional benefits, which are these restricted shares. They can also be like major brokers or companies who actually purchase these shares as an investment. So like when you look up a stock, which we'll get into a little bit later, you'll see that there's a lot being held by insiders, and I'll actually go on to show you how you can actually find out who owns those shares. Now, this will then lead us to the breakdown of the outstanding shares, which is then restricted shares and the remaining shares being traded to the public, which is also known as the big term we all want to know of, which is the float. Now, we'll actually use before that, I'll explain to you what the float is. A lot of people make a big deal out of the float. Well, it's actually fairly simple. The float is actually just the remaining shares from what's left that the treasury has already been withheld, from the shares that were issued, and the shares that are not restricted. That leaves us with the float. So say there's actually, we'll say 150 shares that are restricted. They're keeping these to give to employees or executives, or some other companies wanted to invest and buy like a portion of the company, not buy a portion, but invest in a portion of the company. This is where those restricted shares are. They would have to file that with the SEC to make this possible. Excuse me. However, the remaining shares, the float, is what is traded every single day on the public stock exchange. And so in this case, you have 550, 150, which is 700. So that would leave us with 300 shares left to be traded every single day. Now, let's say within a year's time that XYZ is just absolutely killing it. Well, they want to do a buyback of some shares. Well, they would do that from the market. And so when they do buy back these shares, it would actually go to their treasury. So say they wanted to buy 100 shares. They would actually buy the 100 shares. So this would now become 200, and this would now be 650, because the overall shares that were issued to the market is 1,000. So that's these numbers always that it always has to be 1,000 no matter how you break it down. Now, say one of the companies or executives that has some restricted shares, say an executive wants to, sorry about my pug in the background, he's having a nightmare. Rex, you okay, bud? Yeah? What were you chasing, a cat? Squirrel? What were you chasing? Anyways, say the executive wants to sell 50 shares. Well, this would now get broken down to 100, and those shares would go onto the open market. So now you'd have 250 shares because they sold at whatever the current price was. Well, it actually doesn't have to be the current price, but that's what it is. So now say another year goes by and they're not doing so hot, and they want to do a public offering on, say, a day that they release some good news, stock price goes up a little bit. Well, they can do a public offering. So they could actually take 100 shares. Oops. So I could take 100 shares, which would bring us back to the 550, and those would go onto the market to be publicly traded. So now we would have, just get rid of the 350. It's not, why are you not working? No, I don't want to erase all of it. I just want to erase some of it. Okay, the eraser doesn't want to work all of a sudden. All right, well, we'll just do that. So now this would become 350. So all said and done, after all this happened, as you can see, stocks can start off one way, but they can get shifted around and end up a different way. Let's actually clear all the ink. There we go. So when you have XYZ here, and we'll go back to the initial, so we got 1,000 at the 450, 550, and remember, they're always going to want to keep enough in the treasury so that they kind of maintain control. 150, and then 300. So this is a pretty simple breakdown of what a ticker would look like when you're going to trade them. You have the initial IPO. They decide that they had 150, kind of like as early investors, or, these are the shares that they're keeping for their, execs within the company, or to hand out via, benefits and through salary. They kept 550 for themselves, just because, what company doesn't want to invest in themselves? Would you want to invest in a company that doesn't invest in themselves? No. And then so that would leave us with the 300 in the float, which is what you would be trading in and out each day. Now, how do you find who owns these shares? Or how do you figure out what the float is the easiest way? Well, to me, I like to just go to Yahoo Finance. And what you will see, I just have GE up. I was looking at some stocks earlier. And you would just pull up, let's just do Tesla, for instance. I don't trade these big cap stocks. I just look at them here and there. But it'll come up, and then you just go to the statistics tab, and right over here, you'll see the float. Now, under the float, you'll see that they have 126.57 million float. Now, their shares outstanding is 172.72. So what that means is there's most likely around 50 million shares that are restricted, which means that they have either been bought by insiders, bought by, held by institutions, held by insiders. There you go. So the institutions are, the brokers and the companies that I was talking about earlier. So to actually see who owns these, we can go right here. Yes, to the NASDAQ.com, and you would type in, let's say, Tesla. And you simply scroll down here, and right here you can actually see who is holding each of these. Here's where you can actually check their SEC filings as well if you are into reading that kind of stuff. But right here you can actually click on this, Institutional Holdings, and it'll actually break it down and show you who's increased positions, who's decreased positions, how many shares, all that good stuff. So if you scroll down here, you can see on just it looks like the last round that went through was right at the end of the day, or right at the end of the year, which makes sense for tax purposes. So you can see that all these companies and, big banks and whatnot are making, either withdrawals, deposits. You can see some are in the negative, some are in the positive, and it'll show you change in percentage. It'll show you the value in 1000s, and that's that. And I mean, there's just, obviously this is a bigger stock, so there's just pages and pages, which is going to take a while to load. But I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of people that are investing in Tesla. So if you go back real quick to here, TSLA, go to statistics, you can see that that number shows you that a lot of these shares are obviously being held by institutions. And believe it or not, that actually is only, when you break down the shares outstanding versus the float, it's only about 50 million shares that are going between them. And all of those, actually, let me go back real quick, you can see are actually in these SEC filings, which you can go through. And actually within these, I'm not, I don't look into these, this isn't my style of trading. Some people do. I don't even know. That's actually, I have the form list in here because I have been, just looking to learn just for the future, for maybe some long-term investments or whatnot. But you can actually go through, and every one of those institutions that have invested in Tesla, it's filed here. And if you want to read it, it's all open to you to read because it's all public. So you can use that as you want. So like I said, it is really that simple with the shares. They get an authorized set of shares when they come to the public market, and become an IPO, the initial public offering. They can choose how many shares of those authorized shares that they would like to send to the public offering. And then within those shares, they can have restricted shares that are bought, and they're basically through filings with the SEC, and whatever's left is what we get to trade, which is the float. So how float affects the price action, that will be in the next video. So with that, I would appreciate if you like and subscribe. Any questions or comments, something I may have missed, down in the comment section below. I'll be happy to answer you and expand some thoughts, within the comment section. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow because that's when I'm going to do part 2. Peace.